Welcome to Tarun IS. Today we will be discussing editorial from the Hindu of 14th of October 2022. So let's start with the editorial. Today we will be discussing India and population policy. We will look at that how India's population policy has evolved over the years. What are the different objectives of the India population 2000, and we will also talk about what the writer has suggested when it comes to the the population policy that India needs to adopt, or whether it needs to adopt or have a population policy or not. So basically I have taken all the important point from this article which appeared in the Hindu, and you can relate this article with general studies paper 1, that is population and associated issues, and general studies paper 2, that is government policies and intervention for development in various sectors and issues arising out of the design and implementation. Now, what is the context of this news? If you remember that in the year 2022, the United Nations Population Fund, which is UNFPA, United Nations Population Fund, had published a report which is known as the State of Population Report. State of Population Report 2022. State of Population Report 2022. Now, if we consider the arguments by the writer, the first argument which the writer says is that India is going to become the most populous country by the year 2023, and it was even said by the UNFPA report. All right, and the economic survey points that India's demographic dividend is going to peak around 2041. Now, what does this mean that India's demographic dividend is going to peak? Now, if we look at this year 2041, then by this year India's working population, what do we mean by the working population of India? You see, the number of people in the age group of 15 to 49, this is considered as the 59. This is considered as the working population. All right. Now, this people within this age group will peak around the year 2041, which will be approximately 59%. And after this year, after 2041, India's population is going to decline. That means India is going to have more number of aging people. All right. So in this context, we need to ask that does India need a population policy? And if yes, if India does need a population policy, then what kind of population policy India needs to have? Whether it needs to have a population policy which is going to arrest the population which is already declining, or it is going to have a different aspect in the as one of its objectives, such as health, skill, education, or welfare of the older older people. So let's see the arguments which are presented by the writer here. The first argument that the writer says is about what is needed. Like when we speak of the population policy, suppose we take the population policy and we have designed, you are the policy maker and you are designing a population policy. Which are the factors which you will consider while designing it, and what are the outcomes that you would be expecting this policy to have? The first thing that the writer says is that India does not need a family planning approach. What India's approach should be is the welfare approach. That means a population which already has reached to the fertility level which is even lower than the replacement rate. Now, if we consider 2.1 as the replacement rate, then India from above than 3 for total fertility rate has come down to the total fertility rate of 2.0, and this is the national average. Every state does not have 2.0 as their total fertility rate. The total fertility rate in India varies across state. For when I say the southern state, the total fertility rate is 1.7. This is on an average the states have this total fertility rate. And if I compare this total fertility rate with the northern states such as UP and Bihar, then the total fertility rate is approximately 3, and it is, in fact, it has now reached to 2.7 in UP after its extensive focus on controlling the population. This is an approximate, I am saying. Now the age, so therefore the writer says what is more needed is the empowerment of the different age group of section of the population. That means we need to not, we cannot have a uniform population policy for every age group. The every age group in India and every section of India demands different benefits. The population policy needs to cater to their demands. Elderly population, the focus of the policy when it comes to the elderly population will be different, and the focus of the policy when it comes to the youth will be different. We will see that how different it will be. So the writer says more importance should be given to healthy and more productive population. Rather than have a controlling approach, we can have a natural decline in the population while the government focuses on the welfare and the benefits such as the social empowerment of the population, that is the health and the education and the skills, because we know that we have this limited demographic dividend, and after and post 2041 the population is going to decline. That means we will have lower number of people entering in workforce. Therefore we need to have an approach which is going to make population not only healthy but also more productive, so that one individual is so productive so as to balance the declining productivity due to the declining age group and due to the declining working population. All right, so the writer also says that we have to, in order to harness the limited window of this demographic dividend, we need to be more focused on imparting skills to the population. Rather than controlling the population, we need to impart the skills. That means our top priority is the human resource. The government of India cannot always have a welfare approach. We need to build capacity. And this is exactly what Amartya Sen had suggested, that we need to build what? Capacity. Therefore, the writer says that we have to learn from China's one child policy. That China had strictly implemented one China policy and the population declined so much that now China give incentives for producing children. So every country need to have a balanced approach. Suppose, now let me draw an illustration here. Suppose there is, more elderly population, like 5 elderly population. There is 2 couple. Now the first couple decides not to have a children because of the urbanization, different changes in the family values, and etc. etc. So the one couple decides no children, and the other couple decides to have only 1 or 2 children. Now it is their choice. Like they are deciding this as per their choice and as per their economic status also. Now they decide. Now if you look at this, there are already 5 elderly people, and if I look at the ratio of male and female in this elderly population. So let's take 3 female and 2 male. I am just trying to illustrate that why India needs to focus more on human capacity and less on controlling population. So there are 3 females and 2 male, and this couple would also grow old, right? So if you see that the elderly population will now be 4 female and 2 3 male. This 4 female and 3 male. Now these will be added to this elderly population, and because of the advancement in the health and other facilities, the elderly population, the human, they have longevity, their lifespan has increased. So therefore we are adding to the elderly population, and there, if they decide to have 1 children or 2 children, and one couple decided not to have children at all, so these 1 or 2 children will have to bear the burden of this 7 elderly people, which is absolutely disproportionate. So if this is the scenario, that India cannot focus on controlling population, India has to, according to the writer, has to focus on increasing the productivity. The writer also suggests that technology is going to help here. But however, the writer also cautious that we cannot completely rely on the technology. The technology is there to aid us and not to replace human. So this is what the writer says here, that we need to have a healthy, productive population, and therefore the population policy is to be directed in this direction. The writer also talks about creating conditions. The writer says that government cannot coerce or government cannot force people to limit their family size. The government must create conditions which automatically, or you can say which naturally, leads to declining family size. Therefore, the family size reduction should be natural and it should not be forcible. Now let's see what the writer talks about the elderly population. Writer says that the automation is going to make a huge difference because of the 2 reasons: the rising elderly population and decreasing working population. So technology and automation is going to make a huge difference. But however, like I said, the writer says it should not replace human. It is there to aid human and not replace human. The changing nature of the family needs, they have to be kept in mind while designing the policy for the elderly population. If we see that currently elderly population forms approximately 8.6 percentage or 8 percentage of the population, it is going to increase to the 12%. That means every 5th Indian will be a person above the age of 65. Every 5th Indian will be a senior citizen. And also there is a phenomena of feminization of the elderly population, which is also need to be considered while designing this policy. Therefore, the writer's main focus is not on controlling population. The writer's main focus is on empowering different section of the population, is on making the population more healthy and more productive. When it comes to the youth, the writer talks about the skilling. The writer talks about that how the demographic dividend is going to change soon, and we have this limited offer, we have this limited times where we can harness the benefit, where we can seek every opportunity to skill, reskill and upskill our youth so as to have a productive population which not only caters to the present demand, which also caters to the future demand. So basically the writer says we need to have a sustainable development in our mind while designing the policy. Now let us see the fertility rate. Now writer says that India's fertility rate has already reduced from the replacement rate. Therefore, the major focus becomes skilling and education. And in designing population policy, the writer says the gender dimension needs to be considered. We need to focus on empowering gender. Like currently, we have lesser number of female participation, and even lesser number of participation from the vulnerable sections like person with disabilities and transgenders. So therefore we need to keep in mind this gender dimension while designing any policy. So we need to have a policy which addresses the sexual and reproductive needs. Now what does this mean? Suppose if a couple wants to limit the size of the population, their family, but they do not have this access to the means which limits the family size. For example, the contraceptives, for example, other methods such as sterilization, etc. So therefore we have to create the opportunities for them. We have to create the accessibility and affordability of the means to limit the family size. And contraceptives are considered as the inexpensive means to limit the family size. Therefore the writer says that we have to build agency, we have to focus on creating conditions, and we have to harness the demography of India in this limited window that we have. Now, finally, we see what the writer says. Do we need a policy? Writer says that India already has a population policy of 2000, which was formed after the expert recommendation of the task force under the chairmanship of M.S. Swaminathan. Under the task force of the M.S. Swaminathan, right? So writer says that we only need to make changes in this policy and not to have a new policy. The changes according to the population need or according to the demographic need can be accommodated in this policy, and we need not spend so much energy or time on designing a new policy altogether. So what we need is the support to the reproductive health of individual. Make the means more accessible and more affordable. India must think beyond. The writer says that India must think beyond the two-child coercive approach. It may look very attractive, but the writer says that imposing two-child norms is basically a coercion, which is even contradictory to the India's population policy of 2000, which talks about voluntary limiting the size of the population. So now let's just see a few periphery topics. The first topic is the population policy. Basically, if I am to define a population policy, it means that the measures or the steps which are taken in order to maintain a healthy population, which falls within the carrying capacity of the country, and it also meets the unmet reproductive needs of the reproductive population, which is from the age of 15 years to the 49 years. So therefore the writer says that we must think beyond the two-child approach, as the writer consider it as coercive approach. All right. So we were talking about the population policy, and we were talking about the definition of the population policy, and now let us see that how the India's population policy has evolved over the years. The first, it is the pre-independence era. Basically during the time of the Britishers, it is considered as the period of indifference. Like Britishers, they had no intention to limit the size of the population, they had no intention to pay attention to the healthy and productive population. So basically it is considered as the period of indifference. When it comes to the post independence measures that were taken in the 1951 itself, India became the first country to have a population policy. However, it was dragged over the years. There was no population policy as such. However, India did have the objective to limit its population size, considering the limited resources that India had post partition, and of course after the more than 200 years of colonial rules. So therefore, from 1947 to 51, it is considered as a period of neutrality, And from then onwards, India started to focus on limiting the size of the population, maintaining a healthy and reproductive population. So now let us see that how India's population policy has evolved over the years. If we look at the 5 year plans, we know that until 2017, India had followed the 5 year plan, and with the institutionalization of Niti Aayog and the abolition of the planning commission, we no longer have 5 year plans. But before that, we had 5 year plans which had specific objectives in mind to be fulfilled or to be accomplished within the 5 years. So, the first 5 year plan talked about the natural family planning devices. The second started to focus on the education and the research, and from the third plan onwards, sterilization became a norm. And from in the fourth plan, we had all forms of birth control were encouraged, whether they were pills, whether they were contraceptives, whether the contraceptives are of different types. There are oral contraceptives, there are chemical contraceptives like pills and all, and that is oral contraceptive only. Sorry. And also we have the barrier methods like diaphragm for females and condoms, etc. So all forms of birth controls, they were encouraged, and during the emergency period, the sterilization method was forcefully conducted. It has been the emergency period has been often criticized for forcefully causing sterilization of the people. So this forcible policy that was adopted during the emergency period, or we can talk about and we can in fact say the wrong implementation of the policy, and due to that, for a longer period of time, India, the political leaders or any government in India that was formed, it refrained from having a population policy or even touching upon this sensitive issue. So in from 6th to 8th 5 year plan onwards, long-term demographic goals were established, and in the ninth 5 year plan, an expert group was formed under the chairmanship of MS Swaminathan, who had recommended certain things and which then formed the national population policy of 2000. So the recommendation by the MS Swaminathan committee or the task force formed the national population policy 2000. Now we'll look at some of the important points related to the national population policy. The first thing is this, that in the year 2000, India had passed population of 100 crore, and China still was the most populous country, but now we know that in the year 2023, India is going to surpass China. Right. So basically, if I am to summarize everything that was written in the national population policy, then the NPP, it was to focus on the health and the reproductive needs of the population. It rejected the coercive methods. It rejected the coercive method. It focused on declining the total fertility rate by choice. By choice. By having social empowerment, by reducing maternal mortality rate, by reducing infant mortality rate, etc. So these were the major objectives that national population policy had, and it had categorically rejected the coercion as method, any form of coercion. Even for example, in the state of Rajasthan, in the state of Gujarat and Madhya Pradesh, there are policies that the government servants, they cannot have more than two children. In fact, in the state of Gujarat and the state of Rajasthan, a person who is contesting the Panchayati Raj election cannot have more than two children. So this is also considered as a form of coercion, because the female participation is reduced because of this. In the patriarchal society, we know that female does not have the agency. She does not have the choice to decide the number of children. Therefore, NPP categorically rejected any form of coercion, whether it is even in the form of the incentives or whether it is in the form of the coercion, such as these rules and regulations formed by different states. So We are done for today. I hope this editorial will help you in addressing some of the questions related to the population. So, thank you so much for watching Tarun IS. Have a nice day.